Everything I do at work is very much a treat, and I wouldn't want to eat it every day, but bread, obviously, this loaf, if I wanted to make it every day, I could definitely eat it every day. Hey, my name's Corentin, I'm the pastry chef at Butter, and today we're going to make my fake sourdough bread. So it's a very easy recipe that you can make in one day, very low energy, high reward bread that doesn't involve looking after a starter. So I just want to talk a little bit about how the recipe goes. We're going to mix the bread. This is the timing of it actually. Let's say on a weekend day, I'll start this at about 9 o'clock. I will mix my water, my flour, yeast and salt, and mix it a couple of times over the course of an hour or two, and then shape it at about 3 o'clock, proof it at 4, bake it, and it's ready by 5. So with about 20 minutes worth of work, you're going to have a bread loaf in one day. I also would like to acknowledge that this loaf of bread is perfect for me. It works because I know I can make it every time. However, I am not the person I would go to talk about bread, and there are some amazing bakers all over New Zealand, but especially in Christchurch. And so I just want to acknowledge that if I get a few things wrong, I would love to be corrected, but also it's just what works for me. It's not the right way to make bread. It's definitely not the traditional way to make bread. It's just the bread that works for me. Yeah, is that all right? Yeah. Woo woo! Basically, the way I'm going to make this bread, I like to use this tub because it has the measurements on it, and I know when the loaf has tripled, so it's ready to bake. But you can just use a bowl. The only thing you really do need are scales and a Dutch oven to actually bake it in the oven. So I'm going to mix my water and my flour. I'm just going to do that now. So I've got a kg of flour, and I'm going to use slightly warmer than room temp water. If you have a thermometer, it's about 32 degrees. And all I'm going to do at the start is just incorporate it into a dough. So it's going to be quite a wet, lumpy mess, but that's fine. We're going to leave it at that. Yeah, I really, really love making bread because there's something about obviously getting the exact measurements that is very on brand with my job. Everything I do at work is very scaled, and this is too. I weigh everything to the gram. But after that, once you've weighed everything out, it really is just about timing, but also about feel. A lot of this is just feeling how the recipe goes, which I really like. So every time I make it, it's a little bit different. And every time I do it, I become a little bit more familiar with how the dough looks and how it feels. I like getting my hands dirty, which I don't really do with pastry. Pastry is very much all done with tools. And I just really like being able to create something that I can actually enjoy and eat. And it's a staple more than a treat. Everything I do at work is very much a treat, and I wouldn't want to eat it every day. But bread, obviously, this loaf, if I wanted to make it every day, I could definitely eat it every day. Keep as much dough as you can in there, and we're going to just let that sit for 20 minutes before we add our salt and our yeast. So the bread's had 20 minutes just for the flour to absorb the water really. Now I'm going to add my instant yeast. I don't have to dissolve this because it's instant, but if you're using active dry yeast, just dissolve it in about a tablespoon of water. And I'm going to add in my salt, just into a corner so it doesn't touch the yeast, because you can kill the yeast, but if they don't touch, it's fine. So now I'm going to actually wet my hand a little bit. I just use a little bit of water, and I'm going to pull on the corners of my dough and fold it back over to the middle of the dough. And I do this a few times until the dough kind of tightens up. You're going to feel it resist you a little bit, and that's when I start pinching. So to pinch, I just simply grab the dough and pinch through it. And I'm going to alternate between pinching and folding for about 5 minutes. So the dough's rested for about 20 minutes and we're going to give it its first fold. So it just needs about 2 folds in the first hour and a half. You can do that in whatever time you like. I usually let it rest 20 minutes, fold it, and then I'll give it about 40 minutes to an hour and give it its second fold. So the way we do that, I wet my hand a little bit in some cold water. I like to grab one corner all the way at the bottom and I'll lift the dough until I start feeling it to resist, and I'll fold it over itself. And I'm going to do that for every corner. So what we're doing is we're really slowly working the gluten, and layering the folds is helping us build a gluten network so that the bread can hold in as much air from the yeast as possible. And once I get to the last fold, I quite like to tip the dough over itself, so upside down, and that's just going to help us give it a nice even surface. So that's the first fold, and we're just going to give it one more fold in about 40 minutes. Honestly, this is all stuff I just learned from reading. Like, I'm definitely not a baker, I'm not trained, I've never worked with a baker. I just read a couple of books. Cool, so the dough's rested for about 40 minutes and we're going to give it its second and final fold. So same thing, I'm going to grab each corner. You can tell the dough's relaxed a lot in the last 40 minutes. I'm folding each corner over itself, and if it gets a bit sticky, you can wet your hand. And on the last fold, I'm just turning it over onto itself so that it's got a surface to grow from. So I just loosely cover this and let it rest for the next 5 hours or so until it's tripled in size.
5 hours later.
So now all of our dough has bulk fermented. We're going to shape it. For that, you can see that it's got some big bubbles and it's got some aeration, and it's about tripled in size. So to shape them, I'm going to use a little bit of flour to sprinkle around the edges, and just to get my hand underneath there. I don't want to lose too much of the air. I'm just separating it from the container, and I'm going to flour my surface quite generously. Cool. Now this is going to make 2 loaves. I can keep one in the fridge and bake it tomorrow, but for now we'll just bake the one. So I'm going to split this in half and put half aside. Now for this one we're going to shape a ball, obviously, because we've got round baskets. I use rattan baskets with a little bit of rice flour, but you can just flour a tea towel quite generously and use a bowl or a sieve to put your bread in. So I'm going to tuck in the bread a few different times, just from the outside in, and that's actually going to create a smooth surface on the outside. And I'm going to roll it this way. And so now you can see that there's a smooth surface from where the dough rested, and I'm going to use the friction of the surface to pull the dough back and to tighten the surface. So the bottom of it is actually gripping on the counter, and I'm using my fingers to guide it back towards me. And you don't have to be crazy on this, just do it, I don't know, half a dozen times. My first memory of making bread was at gatherings. We had a pastry chef called Georgia who was really, really incredible. She bought a sourdough starter to gatherings and started making bread, and she taught me a lot, actually. So for this one, I'm going to proof it in the basket. Like I said, rice flour, and so the rice flour, it doesn't have gluten, so if there's a bit of moisture in the basket or a bit too much moisture in the dough, the rice flour is going to prevent it from developing more gluten and sticking into the basket. That way, it's just more likely that the bread will come out clean. But in saying that, if you only have regular flour, that's also absolutely fine. So I'm putting it in the basket seam side down. So this bread doesn't need scoring across the top, which is good and bad. You don't get to choose how you score your bread so that when it bakes, it opens up. However, it does also mean that you get a really cool rustic breakthrough and you don't have to do any of the manual work yourself. The next step is to put it in a plastic bag, and I'm just going to let it proof for an hour to an hour and 15 before we bake it. Cool, so I just put the bread in, it's clean, but it's a dirty old plastic bag, and I use the same one over and over again. You can use supermarket bags, which thankfully don't exist anymore. And we're just going to rest this for about an hour.
1 hour later.
So we've proofed the bread. It's going to take about an hour in a warm room, about an hour and 15 minutes in a slightly colder room, but I'm going to show you how to see if it's proofed. So you can see that it's risen a little bit. It's not going to double in volume or do anything crazy, but you can see some little bubbles coming up on the surface. I like to just dip my finger in some flour and I'll push it in here. And when it springs back slowly and most of the way, but not all of the way, it's ready. If it's overproofed, it won't spring back at all, the dent. And if it's underproofed, it'll spring back really quickly and come straight back to the surface. So this has left a bit of a dent, so I'm pretty happy with where it's at, slowly springing back most of the way. We've preheated the Dutch oven for about half an hour at the hottest temperature that my oven goes, which is about 250 degrees. And we've just got to get this dough in there without burning ourselves. So the trick to that is to tip the dough onto a floured surface. You can be quite liberal here. I flour the top and the base, the surface. And I'm just going to slowly turn this out. There you go. You can see a little bit of the seam where we put it down. When we bake that in the Dutch oven and the bread rises, that's actually where it's going to crack. There's going to be some weakness in the surface and it's going to create its own natural crack. So it's obviously quite important not to burn yourself at this stage because this is extremely hot. It already had some flour in it, so it's a little bit smoky. I'm going to flour my hands and pop it straight in there, gently-ish, as gently as you can, just be fast. Lid back on and back in the oven. So again, everything's super hot. I use these really thick tea towels. Oven mitts are also a really, really good plan. And so now we get to see how the bread went. Oh, it's beautiful, yay! So that's baked for about half an hour with the lid on. So the steam's really helped it proof and given us a really nice crust. And now I'm just gonna pop it back in the oven for another 15 with the lid off. You don't have to do this, but I always put a tea towel back on the lid because I've grabbed that hot lid way too many times before. Cool. Cool, so we took the lid off, the bread, mostly baked, and we put it back in for another 15 minutes just to brown, and it's ready to go. So we're going to take it out of the oven and see what's there. I'm pretty happy. So 15 minutes is an estimate. It depends if your oven runs hot or cold. I like to make sure all of the crust is really, really brown, and I like to make sure a little bit of the few bits on top are almost burnt. And so I'm just going to very carefully tip it out. Careful because it is a little bit hot, and then, oof, it's hot. The best thing to do from here is actually to let it cool for at least an hour, which is part of the cooking process. If you cut into it right away, you're going to lose a lot of the moisture as steam, and also it kind of has a bit of a gummy texture while it's hot, and so it's not going to be as nice as if you just let it cool a little. Woo woo! Let's have a look. Pretty good. I quite like this bread because you can see there's some decent air pockets. And it's not completely even like a white bread. If I let it proof a little bit longer, I might get some bigger pockets, but honestly, I'm really happy with this and I'm really excited to eat it. Cool, so I hope you enjoyed making my loaf of bread. I sure did. I really like this because, like I said, I can just make it in a day and it comes out pretty nice. My favourite way to eat it is just with a bit of butter and salt, to be honest. It's its own meal. I'm Corentin from Butter Pastry, and you just saw me make a loaf of bread on StoryBites. Woo woo!